Hi, today we're going to do a little review on factoring, okay, because some of us have kind of forgotten our skills a little bit. So let's look at, factoring a quadratic equation with a leading coefficient of 1. That means the number in front of x squared, we can't see it because it's just 1. If you have 2, 3, 4, something else in front of your x squared, then you have to do a different method. But right now we're talking about when I look at my x squared, it's 1x squared. Okay, this is the most simple type of factoring to do. The first thing we need to do is we want to look at the last number. And we're going to look for something that multiplies to make negative 18. So I like to come off to the side and say negative 18. What are its factors? Well, 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. Will all make a positive 18. Since I want a negative 18, I know one of them is going to be negative. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my middle term, and I want things that add to a negative 7. Now, since I want them to add to negative 7, and I know over here one of them is going to be a minus, really I'm kind of going to be subtracting to a negative 7. So when I look at each one, I want to say, could I look at this and could I get a 7 when I subtract them? Well, 1 and 18 is going to give me 17. But 2 and 9, that can give me a 7 when I subtract. So what I need to do is figure out which one's going to be positive and which one's going to be negative. So if I look, if I want to make a negative 7, then that means I want a negative 9 and a positive 2. Because when I multiply right here, if I multiply positive 2 times a negative 9, I do get my negative 18. And if I add 2 minus a 9, I get my negative 7. Okay? At this point, I'm ready to go ahead and write my answer. My answer is going to be 2 factors together multiplied, still equaling 0. Now again, since I just had that x squared, I know it's going to be x times x. And then I take those 2 factors, my positive 2 and my minus 9, and I just plug them in. A positive 2 and a minus 9. And so my answer becomes the quantity x plus 2 times the quantity x minus 9 equals 0. Okay, let's do another example. All right, x squared minus 5x minus 14 equals 0. And again, important that it equals 0. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at that last number and find its factors. So negative 14. I want to find its factors. So that's just going to be 1 times 14, 2 times 7, and that's it. That's a 7. Okay, so then I'm going to look at my middle term, and I want to make a negative 5. Again, since it's a negative 14, I know one of these is going to be positive and one is going to be negative. Now, 1 and 14, there's no way I'm going to get a 5 out of that, but my 2 and 7, I can. So I need to decide which one's positive, which one's negative. If I want to get a negative answer, that means my bigger number has to be negative and my smaller number will be positive. So now I'm ready to use these to write my answer. I've got my parentheses. They're both going to start with x so that I get my x squared when I redistribute them out. So my 2 terms are a positive 2 and a minus 7. So my answer becomes the quantity x plus 2 times the quantity x minus 7 equals 0. Okay? All right, let's look at what happens, what we need to do if we have a coefficient in front of our x squared, a number in front of the x squared that is not a 1. Okay? So for example, in this problem, I have 3x squared minus 5x plus 2 equals 0. So notice this time I've got a little problem because I don't have a 1 in front of my x squared, I have a 3. We start off very similar to the previous one where we look at this end number, but in addition we're going to look at the coefficient in front of the x squared. And so I'm going to multiply them together, my 3 times 2, and that's going to tell me what factors I need to make. I need to make a positive 6. So let's see, that's 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. And they're either both going to be positive, because positive 1 times positive 6 gives me a positive 6, or they're both negative, because negative times negative will also give me a positive. I look back at my middle term. My middle term is a minus 5. So I need to look at these two and see which ones, when I put them together, is going to give me a minus 5. So that means if I want to get a minus, that means both of them are going to have to be negative, so that when I multiply them together, I still get a positive. Well, negative 1 and negative 6 make negative 7, but negative 2 and negative 3 do make my negative 5. Here's where I start veering a little different from before. Okay? What I need to do is I need to take this term here, and I'm going to split it up into the two factors that combined to make it. So it's going to be a negative 2x minus 3x. And so again, if we were combining like terms to go backwards, that would give me my negative 5x, and that's a negative right there. Okay? And then my other two terms, my 3x squared, just come straight back down. 3x squared. And my positive 2 comes straight down. So I just expanded that negative 5x is all I did. Okay? Now, this is called factoring by grouping, because what I'm going to do next is I'm going to look at just two terms at a time. So if I look at these two terms, I want to say, what can I divide out of both of those terms? Well, 3 and 2, they don't have any common factors, but I have an x squared and an x, which means I could take an x out of both of those terms. Okay? If I take an x out of both of those terms, that's going to leave me with, if I take an x out of the first term, that leaves me with a 3x. So when I multiply x times 3x, I get my 3x squared. When I take an x out of the second term, it just becomes a minus 2, because x times a minus 2 gives me minus 2x. Okay? Then I'm going to look at the next two terms, and remember, we want to look at the signs. I want to know, what do I need to take out of the second two terms so that I end up still with a 3x minus 2. I almost have a 3x minus 2 right now, but what's wrong is instead of a positive 3x minus 2, I have a negative 3x plus 2, but I want it to look like this, positive and then negative instead of negative and then positive. What I need to do then is take out a negative from both of them. The way we take it out is by dividing it by negative 1. Okay, so when I divide negative 3x by a negative 1, I get a positive 3x. And when I divide a positive 2 by a negative 1, I get a negative 2. And again, this still all equals 0. So at this point, I have my two factors. I just have to write them separate. The first factor is really simple because it's already even in parentheses for me. 3x minus 2. Okay? The second factor is what I took out of those two factors. So it's going to be the x minus 1, and this whole thing still equals 0. And there you go. 3x minus 2 times x minus 1 equals 0. Let's look at the next example. 7x squared minus 31x equals 20. So remember, the first thing I did was look at the last number and the first number and multiply them together. When I do that, I get a negative 140. Okay? And then from there, I am going to find its factors. So the factors of 140 are going to be 1 times 140, 2 times 70, 4 times 35, 5 times 28, 7 times 20, and that's all I'm going to have, okay? All right, so, well, there's 14 times 10, but let's see. Let's look at these. The next thing I want to see is how can I get a negative 31? Now, since it's a negative 140, I know that that means I'll be subtracting, and I want to make a 31. So I can't get a 31 there. I can't get a 31 there. Oh, look, I can get a 31 here. When I take 4 away from 35, that gives me 31. One of them has to be negative. I want to end up with a negative, so the bigger one has to be negative. The smaller one has to be positive. So then I take this term and I split it into those two factors with the x. So I had a positive 4x, you do want to write the sign, and a minus 35x. Okay, so that when I combine them back together, it would give me my negative 31x. These first and last term just come straight down, 7x squared. And my minus 20 equals 0. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to look at these first two. 7x squared plus 4x. I can take an x out of both of those. So x, which is going to leave me with a 7x plus a 4. Okay. When I look at my second two terms, I want it to end up being 7x plus 4. Right now I have a negative 35x. I want it to be a 7x. So I know since it's negative and I want it to be positive, I know I'm going to be taking out a negative. But I'm not just taking out 1. I need the 35 to become a 7. So I need to divide the 35 by 5 so that it leaves me with a 7x. So negative 5 times 7x will give me my negative 35. Okay? Negative 5 times what will give me my negative 5 times what will give me my negative 20. So that's going to be a positive 4, which is good because that's what we have over here, right? Negative 5 times 4 gives me a negative 20. And that equals 0. So my two terms, one of them's already in parentheses for me, 7x plus 4. And that times my leftovers, so x minus 5. These equal 0. This is my factored equation. Okay? All right, let's look at one more. 2x squared plus 17x plus 21. Okay, first thing I'm going to do, multiply the outside two factors to get a positive 42. Multiples of 42 are 1 and 42, 2 and 21, 3 and 14, and 6 and 7. Then I'm going to look at my middle term. My middle term is 17, so when I put these together, which one is going to give me a 17? Right here. 3 plus 14 gives me 17. So both of them are going to be positive, so that when I multiply them together, they stay positive, and when I add them together, they'll give me a positive 17. Take this term and divide it into those two terms. 3x, positive 3x, plus 14x. Drop down your other two terms. This still equals 0. Group the first two together, and I can take out an x from both of those, leaving me with 2x plus 3. So then when I group my second two, since I want a positive 2x plus 3 and my positive 14x plus 21, I've already got positives, so I don't have to take out a negative this time. I'm going to take out a positive. Okay? And then I've got 14x, which I want to be a 2x. So that means I need to divide by 7 so that it becomes a 2 instead of a 14. So 7 times 2x will give me 14x. Oops, I should have done this in orange. And 7 times a positive 3 will give me my positive 21. This equals 0. My two terms, the first one, 2x plus 3. And the second one, x plus 7. These equal 0. Okay. All right, so hopefully that helps you a little bit with factoring. If you have any more questions, there's other videos I'm sure you can Google and find, or you can always come into tutoring and check them out there. Thank you so much.